just look back into the past, look back into, whether it's your childhood or your culture, and you might find out very interesting things which you never knew of before. And in my case, learning about the history of Aruba, I've only learned about that 2 years ago. It's very recent where I really learned about my own, history.
Today I have Justin with me, and we're going to be talking about just our human experience, that we have shared human experience of being from the Dutch Caribbean islands, and also he's going to tell me stories about himself, so I'm curious to learn more about you. We met each other on Instagram as we were talking before.
Yeah.
It's really exciting to see the new wave of like artists coming from the Caribbeans, and I think especially from the Dutch Caribbean islands, because for a long time there wasn't so many of us. At least I recall when I was growing up, there was not so many artists, and especially really focusing on the topic of our identity, where we're coming from, like the ancestral history and everything like that.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I really like about your practice, that you use like really the ancestral science, really more the indigenous part of the identity, and also that you use the natural materials. And so I can talk on, but I went to your website and I thought I'm going to use this question on you that you wrote
Yeah.
on
Oh,
this.
interesting.
Let's see. I have to switch it. ¿Quién eres? Wie ben jij? Who are you? King Buddha.
Yeah, that's a question that I'm still researching upon myself, but throughout my artistry. And it started with the sense of belonging, the belonging of knowing who I am as a person, and what am I doing with my own existence in being who I am, and also growing up in the Dutch Caribbean because I'm from Aruba. And this who am I really? And there's a lot of question comes into mind from growing up in the Caribbean. The people from the Caribbean, we're considered multicultural. We have different backgrounds: European, African, like South African. I mean South American or American identities, and all mashed together. And people just tell me, "Yeah, you're a Reuben." But for me, it's like, what is a Reuben anyway? And that kind of topic I started, well, since 2 years ago. I started searching more about going back into the history of Aruba, or also the history of the pre-colonial times of the Americas, trying to see, like, in a way, try to connect the dots for myself and why I feel certain ways. Why don't I feel like I connect with some of the contemporary times? Because for a long time I always felt lost. Well, since I was born, since I was raised in Aruba, I always felt like, who am I really? And it's been a journey there, and from that point, learning about the pre-colonial history of our islands, I felt this huge like connection to the indigenous aspects of our history, which has been very much suppressed by the society. For example, in growing up, going to school, we never really learn much about our own history, but instead we learn more about the Dutch history or the golden age of the Netherlands, and we never really learn about slavery at its authentic form, which is something, and also the indigenous people who were also enslaved, and we never really learn about it. And I took upon myself to learn about those things by doing my own research.
You said about the slavery, and I also, I mean, I assume we got very similar curriculum. We get a lot of like the old Dutch school lessons that they don't even get anymore here in the Netherlands.
No.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And about slavery, the only real quote unquote slavery class that I got was indeed more focused on the African enslaved people. And not only that, but I remember that we were asked to reenact like
Oh,
slavery. And I still, it was slightly traumatizing, to be honest, to reenact it. And especially afterwards when you're learning like all the inaccuracies or things that were left out
yeah.
uh, in those lessons. So now I'm very curious what you found out about the indigenous people in slavery.
Yeah. For for what because I've concentrated more on the Aruban history aspect of what happened with the people there. With one of the first inhabitants, which were the Caquetillo people, which falls under the Arawak group. And Arawak group is also like a group of indigenous people that lived in the Caribbean and the borders of South America and Central America. And well, with the Caquetillo people, they resided on the islands of Bonaire, Curacao, and Aruba. And from uh, from what I've learned is that when the Spaniards, when the Europeans came, a lot of the people, the indigenous people, were displaced and they were moved to Hispaniola, which is Dominican Republic and Haiti.
Yeah.
Do you say Haiti? Yeah, I think so. Well, yeah, it was used to call Hispaniola, and some of them, since they went there to work, and some of them they come back to Aruba, and then they were also they were the type of slaves when they were Aruba that was mostly working not outside, but they were working inside. Like there was a book called Slaven zonder plantage, because Aruba didn't really have plantation compared to Curacao and Bonaire, but the slavery there would consist mostly of like a sort of form of servitude that happened in Aruba. But from there on, people the indigenous people had a little bit more rights, a little bit more choices that they can make, but they were still suppressed. They were still being abused, and you know and considering a lot of people that's considered two spirited. This is that's another type of subject. Um, they were also murdered, but that didn't happen only in Aruba. That happened all across the Americas when the Europeans came. But from so far, the slavery in Aruba wasn't as like you know as expansive as in the ones in Curacao and Bonaire. But it does have a story, which I'm still researching upon it because I didn't go that far into the slavery aspect of the indigenous people. But I'm also busy with the ways of life in the pre-colonial era before the Europeans came.
I mean, that's also interesting because I do find
Yeah,
that a lot of times we tend to focus so much on like the slavery
yeah,
aspect of it, or we're constantly redirected in the sense of, look, your ancestors were slaves, and we
yeah,
often forget to look or don't even get triggered to look
yeah,
further than that because these people had a life indeed before this happened to them.
yeah.
And what is the most interesting thing that you found about the pre-colonial times uh, in Aruba?
The thing I found the most interesting for me was how people treated nature. How people had this it's like a type of collaboration with nature, and also based on they really you can say that the indigenous people really rely on the natural elements there, or else they'll die, because back then there's no technology. People really have to know everything about the landscape that they're on, especially on islands in Aruba, Bonaire, which is it's not really a tropical, it's semi-arid kind of landscape where in Aruba, it can be very dry. Just really have to know your way around it. They utilize this every type of materials that they found there in order to survive, to create a tribe, to move their own people from, because they came from Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
They moved there because the tribe of the Caquetillo, they also have they also have like families of tribes there that falls under the Arawak. It's a whole system, and the way they work with materials, the way they refer the material, like a reference for the materials that they get, and the history behind it also I find very interesting. For example, there's a material that I work a lot with, which I also learned from reading a book about in the history of Aruba, is the material called ruku.
Mm-hmm.
And ruku is this material that, you see also here. It's also, I made this also jewelry, which,
Thing.
yeah, it has ruku. It's like ruku and resin infused. But I'll touch more upon that later, perhaps.
Yeah.
But to talk more about the material, the indigenous people, they use the material for many different purposes, like as medicine, as food, as decorative elements to it, rituals, and they use it to protect their skin against the sun. Because it's also it's like a dye. It really
Mm-hmm.
colors your skin also, and at the same time, it has a lot of like vitamin E. It's very good for your body, and these days, the material ruku, which is also called anato in English or achiote in Spanish,
Uh-huh.
it's we use it in these days for food coloring, and which is very prominent. Like a lot of food, they use that material to give the food a natural color, because ruku is this red powder. If
Mm-hmm.
for the visual element, I can bring. I have two versions of the ruku. Like the ruku at its primary source of material, it is a type of seed.
Mm-hmm.
If that's,
I think
and
I've
the
seen
seed,
the seed.
sorry?
I think I've seen the seed before. Uh,
Yes. And the seeds, which is often sold in, where I come from, it's often sold in supermarkets in Aruba, and my mom buys a seed to make her vegetable oil, to make like a food dye,
mhm.
coloring with oil, to give like a rice color fish or whatever dishes she makes. This is the seed version, and I also have the powder version, which is very, yeah, powdery, but it gives off the color. See my hands? They're already colorful. This is for the ones who see the video. And yeah.
Yeah. And that is really interesting. And I'm also finding it interesting that you actually have it, because I don't recall that we find this at back home in Bonaire in a supermarket. So
Okay.
that already to me showcases that indeed Aruba kept kind of more parts of like the indigenous culture
Hmm.
um, than the other islands. I don't know how it is on Curacao because I didn't grow up there. Um, but it's not a common as far as I'm gonna check. But I'm gonna be there in December.
Yeah.
I'm gonna check it. But I don't recall ever seeing it in supermarkets. Um, so
Hmm.
yeah, that's really interesting. And I did
But
write down. Sorry.
I don't know. No, because I'm also very interested in you growing up in the Bonaire, because I don't know anybody else that grows up in Bonaire, because I have family in Curacao, and I went to Curacao a lot when I was younger because I have family there. But in Bonaire, it's very interesting to hear your own perspective. But I don't know.
I mean, yeah, the we do have. If we're talking about the indigenous part, we do
Yeah.
have kind of like a colony or a place that kind of kept more indigenous history in place, such as Norte Salia, and you also see the people that come from like generations from this area in Bonaire. They really resonate more with their indigenous side. You know, they're having like all of these different symbolisms from indigenous people, like decorating their houses.
Wow.
They claim it. Um, we also have like the paintings in the caves from the indigenous people, and
Okay.
for me, the personal aspect of like indigenous identity has been growing up. My mom always like told me like my grandma was like indigenous from Venezuela, so she actually got to know her, and she would tell me how she was and that she was like so short, long hair, all these things, and I just loved learning about her, and I do believe that she's like one of my spiritual keepers. Like she's always there,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
even if I've never met her, I know she's always there. um, but it also brought some challenges for me identity wise, because obviously
Mm.
uh, we were saying before we're pretty mixed. Um, Most people from the islands are predominantly a mix of African, indigenous, and European, and
Yeah.
different skills on that on that level. Um,
It's
and
interesting to do. Oh, sorry. If you ever did a DNA test.
yeah, that's the thing. I wanted to,
Yeah.
but I have a conundrum in terms of like the quantum telling of blood is also a very
Yeah.
colonial thing, right?
The
So I
quantum
want
blood.
to
Yeah.
know, but at the same time, do I want to be part of that colonial thing?
Yeah, this I also had a problem with that before I learned about my own DNA because it was part of my studies for my graduation, and I really want to learn more about myself, about my. But yeah, the quantum blood, which is a very prominent problem in order to keep people in track of okay who can go be in the reservation and all that. Like, you can see that happening a lot in the North Americas. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah,
So that's my issue, and yeah,
yeah.
that's like a moral dilemma at this point. Do I, because obviously I recognize that indigenous part,
Because
and
you do feel it also, you know. That's also the feeling about it also, and yeah, this the surround that you have, but also the feeling that you feel. Because for me, before I did the test, I already had this strong connection to the indigenous side, and you know about my ancestor looking out for me, and that there's a lot of things at play. And but yeah, that's yeah, you're right. Yeah.
so but now I'm curious. Do you want to share your results?
Well, the results. Well, okay, yeah, I can share it like a little bit. Well, it says I'm 40% European. I'm like around 6% Nigerian from Africa. I'm 1.1% indigenous Amazonian, and the 50% it says Mesoamerican. 50%, over 50% Mesoamerican. I read like, what does Mesoamerican mean? But Mesoamerican just means like people that has indigenous and European heritage that
Okay.
lives in North America and in the Americas. This is kind of like a little bit inconclusive, like 40% European and then no, sorry, my my math is way off. And 20% Europe. I don't know, but it was like 50% the Mesoamerican. That's what I remembered.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's
But
really interesting. Yeah, I do wonder because I obviously have more African features,
yeah,
like the hair. Oh, the hair being one thing, as I mentioned, like one of the reasons that my mom kept mentioning the long hair of her grandma is because she
yeah,
didn't come out with the same hair. She came out
mm,
with more African hair. And
yeah,
after, having babies with my dad, who's obviously more African, like DNA wise,
mm,
we also got more African hair.
yeah,
Um, and it was a struggle because my own mom was struggling with her hair, And the fact that she didn't
Mm.
get that indigenous side in like the hair, so obviously she liked
Yeah.
it. Or I think not only it goes beyond her liking it, but it's more how society views the more African hair. And
Oh yeah.
it's not desirable. Like I've ended friendships
Yeah.
over over this
It's.
topic because once I started my natural hair journey, because most of
Hmm.
my generation and down got their hair relaxed,
Yeah.
and once I started, finally got around the idea of wearing my hair, how it grows out of my head, I've had
Yeah.
to go through some shit basically. And yeah, I still go through that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have
I.
friends that are like, they assume that I would prefer to wear a wig or prefer to have my hair braided.
Hmm.
Um, because a lot of women of color do that. But why do they do that? I mean, partly it's protective styling, but a lot of it has to do with how society views our
Oh,
hair.
definitely. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a struggle. It's a continuous struggle. I am at a place where I can say I love my hair. And
That's
yeah,
so great to really accept that part of yourself, because that is because for me, my friend group is very diverse, and the people, when I'm growing in Aruba, and it's just, what for for the women, person of color, they really, it's a trauma. It's a mental and physical trauma that they have to use such harsh chemicals for their beautiful hair. Obviously, beautiful hair. That's it stems from colonialism.
yeah,
It just stems from the white what's like that? Oh, how do you say it? The European standard of
yeah,
beauty.
the beauty standards. Yeah,
It is so toxic. And for me, for example, in my case, okay, my hair is very, yeah, it's just very curly in nature. But when I was growing up, also going back to the identity part,
hmm,
um, like my family, it's just, for example, yeah, my mom and dad. My dad has very strong indigenous features in my dad's side of the family, and my mom. If you look at it from my grandfather, you see a lot of like African elements that comes back in our family, but people never really say that they have a certain feature, or they would just say, yeah, there's just Aruban or Yuri Curacao, like Curacao, because like I said, a big portion of my family also comes from Curacao. Um, this it's this the for example how it affected me in the sense that for example you see on television you see like the media, you see all the main characters are they either have blonde or light hair, they have
hmm,
very sharp like noses, or they have colored eyes, very light skin, and I see like, oh, so if you're that person, that means you're important,
right.
and for a long time for myself, like I have my dad's nose, and people always make fun of my family, my dad's side, that yeah, my family have big noses, and
Mhm.
yeah, you're gonna have a very big nose too. You're gonna have flat. For a long time, I keep telling myself, yeah, you know what? When I grow up, I'm gonna have surgery. I'm gonna have those noses that are being beautified, being, oh, that's a beautiful nose, and not a flat nose. But it took me a long time to realize that I'm fine the way I am. I don't have to change things in order to settle for societies like, okay, okay, this is beautiful, this, you have to be that. But
Yeah,
I'm still kind of affected this day about, yeah, if you don't have Caucasian features, then you're ugly. It's still in my mind, but it's not the case. I'm still affected by that, honestly.
yeah. I've been in rooms with my own family, and
Yeah.
you would see the people on television, and the more African features they had, the less they were desired, or certain comments were made, especially about the nose. My own grandma, my grandma, or the lady
Hmm.
that is my mom, but she's not biologically my grandma. Um, she had her biases. I love her to death, but she had her biases. I remember specifically each time someone came on TV that had like a big nose, like more like an African nose,
Yeah.
she would make comments like, "Oh, that like 2 trays of like oven that by I want to say that into those planche the bolo.
Oh.
You know, like you can do like two cakes in those in that oven, like such comments.
Yeah. Oh
As a
gosh, those
child, I
little
was like,
comments.
"Hey." But when I grew up, I was like, "Whoa, that was hella racist, grandma." You know, like so yeah. And our own people are making these comments about and
Yeah.
especially about the African side. And
Yeah.
I think it kind of has to do with we don't really know our history, the history
Mm-hmm.
that we are taught, um, especially the African side, is so kind of demonized.
Yeah.
They're really put down as people that were like stupid enough to get captured and brought
Uh-huh.
here, and they're not able to have an education and all the other stigma. So I noticed that kind of seeped its way into culture, though it's not really culture. Are you familiar with the concept of post-traumatic slave syndrome?
Post-traumatic slave syndrome?
Mhm.
Wow. No, I never heard of that.
Oh, there's a very good scientist, researcher, I think social researcher. Her
Yeah.
name is Dr. Joyce DeGroy. I'll send it to you later if you want.
Oh, that's just great because I was just gonna write it, but yeah,
Yeah,
send it
I
to me
saw
later.
you.
Yeah.
I
Great.
can't, I can't spell it out now properly, so I'll just send it to you later. But post-traumatic slave syndrome, and she did research because she noticed these behaviors, like the one that we're talking about just now, like us making comments about ourselves
Mm.
this way, but also just Black people behavior in general. Like it's so uh, noticeably different in some, especially the ones that went through the whole slavery era and these things, and
Yeah.
just ways of educating our children at home, how the beatings, the
Mm.
talking the children down,
Mm.
just this whole package. And she just asked herself, why do we do that? Why when uh, a mom picks up their child at school and the child is given a compliment about their work, they immediately say, "Oh, they could have done better" or something like that. And that's
Mm.
like one of the reflexes of being on the plantation or being in that situation of
Mm.
slavery, that they could possibly sell your child if your child is too good. And these were, so after, basically after slavery was abolished, people were like, yeah, look at the good we did, we stopped like having these people do this work. But no one gave those people a psychiatrist or a psychologist to really process what happened to them. um,
Mm.
and thus that trauma has been
Yeah.
giving down through generations and still continue.
Yeah.
We're still
The
we're now learning
intergenerational trauma. Yeah.
what's actually going on. That some of our behavior is actually trauma and not
That
actual
is
culture. But this is her work, and this is what something that she researched, and it is something that
wow.
I apply in these situations when I think back on my own childhood, my culture
Yeah.
now still, people back home, and how
Mm.
they're reacting to things and comments we made. And yeah, it really comes back from this element of we never really heal. Our ancestors,
They no. Oh my gosh, yes, those are the topics of conversation, the trauma, the healing aspect. And it's the same from the first episode that you released in your first season about childhood trauma. I really can relate to that. And then how our parents treated us, because the way our parents were treated when they were kids were the same way how their own parents were treated them. It just goes down the line, how we were treated. And yeah, the childhood trauma. I mean, yeah, I've endured a lot of my own traumas. So for me, my healing is my art, my artwork, but not only for myself. At first, foremost, it comes from myself, but then I'm also doing it for other people. For example, the work that I share online, I put stories in it. I put references where I got stories from. I really also want to share about my own experiences with people, and also trying to find my own tribe in that regard. Also. So
Yeah.
I'm really happy we're talking about these
Yes,
things.
I am. I'm so happy also that I tried to find back the post that you shared that I reacted to that then ended up us having this conversation in the first place. But I couldn't find it back. I did find my own answer and I could like mark down what I said. Um,
Yeah.
but how is your experience, or how has your experience been with that collective side? So how are people reacting to you sharing this information with them?
Yeah, it's people really see people all the way from Aruba and also Curacao telling me like what I'm doing is something very important, something that's not often talked about, and about to to see certain patterns that we do for ourselves and why we do certain things. It's important to go back in the past. It's important to look back upon the things that used to be happening. For example, how people, for example, in a way, people part of the LGBT
Mm-hmm.
today, they also experienced a lot of, discrimination, just for being who they are. And that also correlates a lot to, BIPOC, the BIPOC,
I've heard of.
Black, indigenous, person of color.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of correlation also between those two groups. And for example, I'm part of I consider myself queer, gay, it's like, and there's a lot of trauma that's much more prominent when you're a certain way. And people will tend to like nitpick on your behavior and how you do certain things. And that becomes, yeah, it becomes a trauma.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm kind of lost in your question.
That's
I don't know
okay.
if there was
I started with the collective, but I find this train of thought
the
also
collect.
very interesting. Uh, because I
Yeah, the
also
collective. Yeah, how? Yeah,
it's okay. That's what
uh,
I'm editing for. um,
yeah. That's why.
yeah.
No, the collective. That's why I connected a lot with people that are from the Dutch Caribbean and are also part of the LGBT, because they understand the pain that I went through myself. When I talk more about my work on a deeper level, one-on-one, individual, when they DM me,
Mhm.
so I talk more about my own experiences, and then they also talk more about their own experiences, and then we have like, hey, yeah, that's how we connect with each other, and so that's most of the time that's what happened between my interaction with the collective, because it's like I'm giving them a voice in a way. Like, that's not my intention, but because of my own experiences, they can connect to that.
Yeah, I completely understand you. And even for me, like I wrote a book about myself, and I got
Yeah.
similar reaction to it. And actually, going back to should I go back? I'll finish that thought first. So I got similar reaction to it, in the sense that I wrote something very for myself, very personal,
Mm,
just healing. In a way, I'm also healing with my art, through my art.
yeah.
And the reaction that I got then from my readers, I also went through this. I resonate
Yeah.
do with your writing. And yeah, it was really great. It wasn't, I just thought, okay, I'm going to introduce myself as an artist. This is the shortest story I can tell right now, the quickest one I can do. Um, but the reaction I got was really nice. And actually, going back to the LGBT
Yeah, I get it.
IA of it
Yeah, it
all.
becomes longer and longer. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's also for me. I ended up in the end resonating more as being queer.
Mm,
Why? Because I tried to explain it to people at certain points.
yeah.
It was a mess. I first I identified as bi, but then I went through a period in my life where I was dating more women, and then you get the
Hmm.
question, "Are you a lesbian now?" And then each time I get that question, I was like, "Fine, then I'll be a lesbian. I don't care." You know, I personally didn't care to identify as anything actually.
Yeah.
Um, but in the end, I was like, okay, queer is big enough to keep me happy, and it shuts up the people because a lot of people don't really question queer as a
No, I love the term also. Me and my partner, or my partner, my boyfriend. It's like, yeah, queer. We both use queer because it's just, very, it's like because you just don't define yourself. Just being queer, then okay, it's a, like also an umbrella term about your own sexual identity, and concerning sexual identity, is if you think about it, it's none of other people's business. What you do in that private time, concerning your sexuality, and people really like to. Yeah, I don't know. Some people have this weird, morbid curiosity finding
yeah,
out about your. I don't know. So that's why
it's
queer is just this term. Also for me, for example, my own experience concerning my own sexuality is that it has been its ups and downs, and I've had girlfriends. I was sexually in with a female and a male presenting person, but for me in the later times in my life, I've been more busy with male presenting people,
right.
and but considering my sexuality, I'm not saying that I'm only gay because I feel like that label for myself doesn't fit. So that's why queer is also very much, yeah, I'm much more comfortable with that also. But
Yeah.
people tend to question, sometimes some people do question, okay, what is queer? What is gay? And yeah, it depends who asks also and who's
Yeah.
really interested as a person knowing about those kind of, you know, um, representations, labels, whatever. It
Yeah.
depends, really depends on the people who you talk with, and then you can give them an explanation about your own experiences. But most people just don't, in a way, don't, not that they don't care, but just, oh, okay, you're that, fine, okay,
Yeah.
you know,
I in a way prefer that because I don't like to
yeah,
contemplate too much about it. Like it never, like growing up, I was just naturally attracted to person. Like,
the
I didn't
person,
really like,
exactly, the energy of people,
yeah.
and that brings me also back to the term two spirited. You have heard the term?
I've heard the term. I wrote it down because I actually wanted to ask you about it. So go ahead.
Yeah. Um, it is actually like this umbrella term that was coined in the early 90s. There was a conference in North America, United States, about queer indigenous people, and they saw that in different tribes, people have a different terms for the meaning of third gender, or the non-binary aspect, where people feel like, if a female presenting person wants to wear male presenting clothing, then they can do that. Or so it's all about how they feel and what they identify as. This every term is different in different tribes. So that's
Right.
why one woman came with this term two spirited, which is like this umbrella term, and also which, yeah, it is. It is like the indigenous version of non-binary, but at the same time not, because the two spirited consist of the male spirit and the female spirit existing together with you. And I believe also that every people has this masculine and feminine energy. And it's very nuanced. But for some people, in my case, for considering how I identify myself, like for me, I identify as a male presenting person, but I feel a lot of feminine strength, a lot of feminine energy, where I feel like, I'm a guy, but I'm also not a guy. Yes, I say but I'm not saying I'm a woman, but I'm saying I'm incorporating that feminine energy, and I
Yeah.
find it very powerful. Those two together.
I have a theory about
Yeah.
that. I agree that we all have that male female energy in us. And I have a theory on why like the gender thing has become as big as it
Hmm.
is now. Um, I think that we gendered things to the extreme. That, for
Hmm.
example, a certain clothes, like I have a dress on now, like dresses are for girls, and
Yeah.
barbs are for girls, and G.I. Joe is for guys, and they're supposed to wear the pants and everything. And I think this element screwed up a lot of people that
Yeah.
maybe a guy just wanted to wear a dress, and if in my world, in my perfect world, no one would bat an eye. But because we live in the world we live in, it gives such pressure to identify as one or the other.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I think that has brought a lot of confusion in the sense. So, yeah, that's my gender theory in short.
It is. It is. The confusion is like, yeah. I think that's why it's the idea why people had to put us in a binary system. Just being a man or a woman, it's something, oh yeah, that's simple. The reason that's been put to maintain a certain order within the colonial system, within religion, it's like religion, oh, doesn't, I'm like, eh, it's a whole can of worms also there. But the way, yeah, the way how we present ourselves is really much been affected by how the colonial system is,
Yeah,
yeah, it's forced upon us, and to this day it still thrives, that system. And when there comes the patriarchy, there comes the misogyny, there comes, the discrimination of all kinds if you're not a certain person, which is very unrealistic when people expect you to be the way they want. I don't know. For example, there's during the colonial history also, there were a lot of residential schools that were being built up to
hmm,
specifically erase a person's culture in the person's native land. Try to lose the language, try to lose the way they, the food that they eat, their own ways of living, their ways of revering nature. The residential school made sure that they go to the Western idealism of, in converting to Christianity, wearing the type of outfits that the Europeans wear, basically
right.
to
Hmm.
forcefully convert. And you know, if you heard, I think it was 2 years ago that they found like one of the residential school that didn't, they found a lot of skeletons of children.
Yeah, it was Canada, right?
It was in Canada, yeah.
Yeah, we've
So
seen
it's
this.
like, what happened? And there were some accounts of people that survived the residential school that they're still alive to this day, talking about, if children were disobedient, the indigenous children mostly, they would get killed, they would get mistreated, abused in any way, emotionally, sexually, physically. It's I
That's
can't
Canada.
imagine.
Yeah.
It's and it's also happening in Aruba. For example, there's on Instagram, I follow a lot of indigenous, also Caribbean based accounts, and there's a account about in Caribbean in people, and there was one of them talking about the indigenous history of Aruba. and they
Mhm.
were showing pictures about a lot of children, and you see like a nun or a priest beside them.
Yeah.
It's like already starting with the residential school, like converting the people. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, it's the Know Your Caribbean, I think you're talking about.
I think it's Know Your Caribbean. Yeah, I also
Yeah.
commented there. Yeah, yeah, about my own because apparently people as healers, indigenous people were healers using natural remedies, and I learned a lot of things there that I didn't even know. Also, like the Europeans asked the indigenous people to cure them of different ailments, and like whoa, and that does make sense. For example, I'll get something very fast. I have a book here that I recently got in Aruba when I was in Aruba. It's called Remeditera,
Okay.
and Remeditera consists. Yeah, it was made by a group of women, which they wrote on a lot about medicine of the earth. Basically, yeah, Remeditera means medicine of the earth,
Yeah.
and yeah, for the ones that can see the video, well, there's a lot of pictures of plants and their names, and it's written in papiamento, and it says all of the different ways you can use it in plants to treat an ailment. And I find it a very important book, and I find it very important knowledge that has to be passed on because
Yeah.
it's part of the as long as much as the Europeans, the colonial settlers tried to erase the culture, it still thrived,
Yeah.
and also it's still based. For example, the Kakitiyo people, the language may be extinct, but it is still alive in Papiamento. Papiamento also uses certain words that has indigenous in origin to it. And even, I don't know about Bonaire, but in Aruba, we have a lot of places that has indigenous names and also animals and plants that have indigenous names and that we still use to this day. There's a, in one shape or the other, the indigenous culture, despite the genocidal effort that the people has put upon on our ancestor, but it's like a resistance, It's like yeah, it survived. We survived the trauma and from the past. So it's something it's something for me in my own case that I want to also concentrate a lot more about things that are still with us that we don't have to forget about them. So I find it very important to go back on certain words that hey, this word, yeah, it comes from our ancestors. It's very important to remember them. And I find Papimento is also has its own history there. In
Yeah.
Bonaire, Curaçao, and Aruba, we are the only three islands that speaks in Papiamento or Papiamento. It's
Yeah.
yeah. We have an amazing we have an amazing culture concerning our language.
Yes, there's something also that I want to dive into. I was some time ago. I was learning about like African spirituality, and
Hmm.
some things sounded like Papiamentu, Kaaba, like these. I wrote it. I have it written down. I started. I never. It's like one of those things I started that I have to get back to. Uh, but I find it also interesting to see how which things that um, come from these spiritual systems uh,
Hmm.
Africa that we also still have in our language.
Yeah.
And also, likewise, for the indigenous part, is something I've heard before. That especially in the names of like nature things, like the trees and the animals and these things that we kept it. So it's really interesting work to
Hmm.
be done. And I keep making sorry.
It's funny.
Yeah, it's really interesting work to be done, and I'm just curious. I think with you alone, I can make like a couple of topics that I'm gonna handle this season. So that's great. 'Cause I
No,
have this also as like the opening of the season two. So it's a great introduction
awesome.
to the other topics.
That's great.
and sexuality and all of these things as well. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, thank you very much for
Yeah,
joining me.
thank you so much too, and thank you for telling your own stories. Thank you for the exchange of knowledge about our own experiences. I really appreciate you for that.
Yeah, no problem at all. And yeah, so excited that you came and that we got to do this. Is there anything else you want to say as a closing to the audience?
Yeah, you know, um, just if you ever feel lost, if you ever feel like you don't know where you belong, you don't have a sense of belonging, just look back into the past, look back into whether it's your childhood or your culture, and you might find out very interesting things which you never knew of before. And in my case, learning about the history of Aruba, I've only learned about that 2 years ago. It's very recent where I really learn about my own history. Just just go back. You never know what you may find, and then from the past, bring it to your present so you can create a better future for yourself and also for your loved ones. Yeah,
Thank you very much for sharing
yeah,
that.
thank you too.
Until next time on Poison Honey Podcast.
Hmm.